David Menzies for Rebel News here in Toronto, and I am back at the Leaside location. Unfortunately, the shut down Leaside location of Adamson Barbecue, and I'm with the owner, Adam Skelly, and it's all about an update to that, that lawsuit that you brought in front of the government, Adam, regarding the Reopening Ontario Act and the, the Emergency Services Act. I might not have the correct name there, but feel free to jump in. Now, when I was here in February, that was about the launch of the lawsuit against the government. What is the latest today?
Well, we're well underway on the constitutional challenge, David, and thank you for being the only agency who's willing to cover this story. You know, the establishment media that surrounded you the last time you were here, CBC, CTV, Global News, they were all here. They all recorded for the whole thing. They asked a bunch of questions, but none of them reported a drop of what happened that day. I guess I didn't give them anything to paint me like some kind of an idiot, as maybe I spoke too coherently. So anyway,
you were very eloquent, if I recall, and maybe you're right. They didn't have any of your own words to hang you by, but nevertheless, who cares what they think? How are things going right now in the cross-examination?
Well, it's been quite interesting. We called 6 experts. 5 of them are PhDs, and there's 1 MD. We have the former Chief Medical Officer of Health from Manitoba is on this challenge. There's epidemiologists, virologists. It's one of the strongest lockdown challenges anywhere in the entire world, and yet there's no coverage of it. So in response to the 6 experts that we brought, the province, instead of calling any of their Chief Medical Officers of Health or any of the other medical health officers like Williams, Yaffe, or Davila, none of them are anywhere to be found. They called one measly expert, Dr. Hodges from U of T. He's a consultant brought in only for legal challenges, and we cross-examined him, and it didn't go very well for the province. The funniest thing that happened that day is he didn't know the difference between the virus SARS-CoV-2 and the disease COVID-19, and he mentioned it in an arrogant way. Well, everybody knows COVID-19 is a virus. So that's how we let off the cross-examination. That kind of set the stage for the rest of it. He got shredded. The province did, despite having unlimited resources, only called this one expert, and he couldn't even opine on the central theme of this whole COVID scam, the PCR test. He said that the same people who take issue with that PCR test also think there's nobody in the hospitals, and those are all conspiracy theories. So he wouldn't even talk about it.
Well, that's interesting. It sounds like they kind of did you a favor by having that person as their expert witness. Now, what is the crux of your argument, Adam?
There is no singular crux. My not legal advisor, but my advisor and friend, Chris Weisdorf, who you'll talk to soon, has been keeping a keen eye on all the challenges that have been unfolding around the world in regards to lockdowns. We're talking about the PCR test, the lack of proof of asymptomatic transmission, how the province and the federal government has not done any cost-benefit analysis on mass and lockdowns whatsoever. We're talking about the variants, we're talking about the statistics behind ICU admissions and the excess mortality, and how none of it is justifiable, or none of it justifies these seemingly endless lockdowns here in Ontario.
You know, it does seem endless, doesn't it? I mean, going back to March of last year, 2020, I remember the famous 2 weeks to flatten the curve just before St. Patrick's Day. And you complied at the time, didn't you? You were operating and you decided to temporarily shut down, if memory serves me correct, but it didn't turn out to be 2 weeks or 2 months. It turned out to be, well, here we are, it's 2021 in June, and it's still under lockdown.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like most of the people in Toronto don't have any real issue with that. You know, I don't think the province has ever had justification to shut down any businesses at all. And the more time goes on, the more evidence is brought to the forefront, how more people aren't dying than usual, how I just got a Freedom of Information request returned from the Ministry of Health that showed that there was about an 8% decrease in ICU admissions in 2020 over 2019. Now, wasn't that at the height of this alleged pandemic? Nothing is added up. There's never been justification. And now they're telling us, oh, we're walking back some of the restrictions. We're opening up patios again. But I think the stage has been set for endless lockdowns to happen for the rest of our lives, because people seem to be perfectly happy complying with these rules when there has never been any justification for them to begin with.
And folks, if anyone is not aware of the Adam Skelly story, I mean, it hit a boiling point in late November. We were there for all 3 days of the so-called Great Canadian Barbecue Rebellion. And here, check out this footage from day 3, where quite literally Mayor John Tory sent in all the King's horses and all the King's men to shut down a restaurant. Check it out. Now, you know, Adam, I thought that was absolutely shameful. I was right there on ground zero observing this.
Literally on the ground at one point,
Yeah,
David.
literally on the ground at one point. And I mean, it was incredible. It wasn't, you know, if somebody had just stumbled upon that scene at your Etobicoke restaurant, they would assume, is this a terrorist cell that's being raided? Is it some kind of drug cartel? No, it was you for simply trying to make a living for your young family by serving food to people who wanted to buy your food. I personally think that this was all about Mayor Tory setting an example of you, not so much about shutting down Adamson Barbecue, but if lo and behold, hundreds or even thousands of businesses opened up, this was Mayor Tory saying to those businesses, how do you like being on the 6 o'clock news? How do you like being led into a cruiser in handcuffs? How do you like the mounted unit coming to your front door? Was that what this was all about? Fear and intimidation tactics by the mayor?
I always tell people that that's all the authorities have in their pocket is fear and intimidation. That's their entire playbook. Anybody who has eyes to see can tell that that's exactly what happened that day. It had nothing to do with health and safety. You had officers lined up shoulder to shoulder with each other surrounding the entire building. We all know that wasn't about anybody's health. That was about sending a message to anybody else who dared challenge the province or any of the governments that are enforcing these lockdown measures.
And you know, a sidebar to the story, of course, Adam, is that to add insult to injury, you were sent a bill for the law enforcement cost, $187,000. Of course, that also included the cost of a locksmith to change your locks and boarding up your restaurant.
Yes,
but
sir.
Here's the thing. I have never seen the state go after criminals to get them to pay for the law enforcement crimes in terms of reining them in. I mean, this is spectacular. What do you think the unspoken strategy is behind this extra level of what I would call vindictiveness?
Well, it's like you said, it's more fear and intimidation. So a funny story about that invoice is it said right on that, and it wasn't an invoice, it was a demand letter. It said you must pay by December 31st or we're going to take you to court and seek a court order demanding payment of that invoice. I just laughed, crumpled it up, tossed it in the garbage, never looked at it again. And you know what? The people at the Ministry of Health, they've never looked at it again either.
Wow.
They never took me to court. They never made any effort to seek payment from me. But remember that last time we talked in February when I held that short press conference here? The next day, instead of all those establishment media outlets reporting on the story of the constitutional challenge, they all drug out that story of the $187,000 invoice and plastered that over the internet. So I think that was their strategy in the information warfare that was happening, because Rebel News posted that video of the interview and it got a lot of traction. Another independent agency posted it and they got over 500,000 views. So I think in retaliation to that and to spread more of their fear and intimidation, they all dropped that story about the $187,000 invoice with no context to the including that they said by the end of December they would seek a court order, and they never did. That part of the story was missing. I wonder why they would do that.
Yeah, I wonder why. And yet there was also another story that emerged. I think it was an attempt to smear you, Adam. It was the idea that you had been operating without a business license. And at first that sounds, oh my goodness gracious, an unlicensed restaurant. But as you told me off camera, there's a whole lot more to this story in terms of what it is to operate without a license and how many businesses indeed are operating that way. Can you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first thing I'd like to clear up is that operating without a business license does not mean that I've been operating outside of any health standards. See that green pass right there on the wall? Maybe you guys can show that later. We have always passed every single health inspection here for the last 5 years with flying colors. In fact, at one of our first ones, I put up a quote from the health inspectors on the wall that said, one of the cleanest places that we have ever seen. So that has nothing to do with the business license. That license applies to my Leaside location and my Etobicoke location. Up in Aurora, they don't require that municipal license, which I consider to be a bit of a tax grab. It's about $500 a year. And the story there, when I opened this place up, I was a young entrepreneur. I started with a very small amount of money, no investors, just me and my wife. And I looked up online the City of Toronto interactive zoning map. I clicked on the area and it said this is an employment industrial area. You're allowed to have a restaurant as long as it's under 500 square meters. Well, that's perfect. Mine's under 500 square meters. I should be fine to operate. So I built out this place. As you can see, it's kind of bare bones, a lot of plywood. Me and my wife built this place with our bare hands. She learned how to do drywall taping, a woman who's never done any trades work before. I learned how to do a lot of work and framing and plumbing, and we built it all with our bare hands. When we applied for the business license, they said, oh, you can't get a business license in this zone because there's an old zoning bylaw from the 1960s that is not available anywhere online for you to find information about. You would have had to come down to City Hall and we'd photocopy it from you from an old book. They told me though, not a big deal. Here, take a fine. It's about $500, very close to the price of that business license. You pay that and we're good. Very soon. Okay, I'll go put on the show for you in just a sec, okay, buddy? Can you just run back over there? I'll come over in 2 minutes.
So that's interesting. It's not about really any kind of licensing. It's just about the city getting their pound of flesh, whether it's a fine or a license.
Yeah, exactly. So for 5 years, once a year, I'd go to court, I'd pay the fine, and they always said, this zoning issue will work itself out. We're going to throw out those old zoning bylaws. 5 years ago, I was told this could be anywhere from a couple weeks to a couple months, but it's still in limbo with the city because of this zoning amalgamation. So there was never any further enforcement action. It was like, give us our piece, and I had no problem. I never made anything public about this because I had no issue with the $500. Keep in mind, in my most successful year in 2019, we did over $1 million in payroll. That means over $100,000 in payroll tax and several $100,000 of HST collected. I am in no way avoiding any taxes or dues to the city, and the idea that this $500 license that they're kind of making it out to be that I'm avoiding it is a total joke. It's $500. I could pull that out of my back pocket right now and throw it down if it would make this go away. It's a zoning issue. I can't do anything about it until the city does.
And you allege there's so many other businesses in the area that are operating exactly like that.
I don't know that for certain, but I can only imagine there are because there's a lot of people who have to comply with not just a 50-year-old zoning bylaw that's completely outdated, but also a new zoning bylaw that the city wants to move towards to make the city a better place.
Gotcha. Now, getting back to the lawsuit against the province, you sent out a press release recently, Adam. It states the following: my lawsuit has very little to do with my restaurant. It is a constitutional question of the Reopening Ontario Act and the evidence or lack thereof used to justify it. The ruling of this case will affect everyone living in Ontario and will set precedent for legal challenges across the country. What does that mean in the nitty-gritty, Adam?
Basically, when all these amazing people raised that money for me in the crowdfunding campaign, over $300,000, I felt like I had a duty to use that in the best way possible, not just for me, but for everybody who's been affected by this pandemic. Now, in the notice of constitutional question, we talk a little bit about my civil disobedience and my history and what got me to this place. In order to build a framework around this case that's based in just exactly that, civil disobedience. But beyond that, this challenge is about the evidence and the legal issues around the Reopening Ontario Act. If we have a successful challenge here, it'll show that the province has not demonstrably justified the limitations to our charter rights. And that'll mean that the entire Reopening Ontario Act, Section 7 and Section 9, null and void, they must be walked back. And that means all social distancing, mask requirements, lockdowns, and all this unfair treatment that's happened to small businesses.
Wow, that is huge. And tell me, in about the half year, this has been a legal battle going back to November.
Yep.
Adam, I'm just curious, I think you've gone through, is it about 5 or 6 lawyers so far in terms of getting representation? What was the, issue in terms of seeing eye to eye with the legal representatives that you had hired?
Well, I'll start by saying that since the beginning of this, all I've done is follow my heart. This has clearly not been a good business move for me. I never thought it was. This wasn't a marketing ploy. I'm well aware, particularly back in November, the vast majority of Torontonians were against what I did. This was a bit of a fringe view. Now, I think that's changed a lot in the last 6 months as more and more evidence has come out that just shows these lockdowns, they're not based in any reality. And these restrictions haven't helped in any way. I think I kind of lost track of your question there.
Oh, in terms of the lawyers that you've gone through.
Oh, yeah. So the first few lawyers, they kind of found their way over to me through some connections, but it seemed like a lot of them, they were not on the same wavelength as me about ending the lockdowns. In fact, one of the first lawyers that I worked with, and he was there that day, the third day of the barbecue rebellion, he was putting on his mask every time the cameras went by, and I said, man, what are you doing? And he said, you know what? I can't have my wife see me on TV without this thing. And I said, oh, who are you, posturing for your wife, or are you working to represent me? So it was some things like that where I knew kind of intuitively, these aren't going to be the guys who are seeking the full truth at the end of the day. So after a number of lawyers, and I'm also, I'm in the civil courts, provincial offenses courts, public health tribunal, and in the criminal courts. So I've had to deal with a lot of different lawyers. Some of them I think might have been acting kind of maliciously and misrepresenting me. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I know now that I've got a team who is representing my best interests and will see this constitutional challenge through in the Ontario Superior Court just the way I want it done.
And Adam, tell me, obviously you've got your agenda filled with so many issues, so many lawsuits, etc. First of all, did you ever foresee yourself in such a position? Now, I look at you, I think of a guy that just wants to make probably the best brisket north of Texas, as far as I'm concerned. And also, what do you say to the skeptics out there who might be saying, oh, come on, this is just a guy, playing the victim, and at the end of the day, it's all about marketing. How many people knew the name Adam Skelly or Adamson Barbecue back in November, and now he's virtually a household name? What would you say to that?
Well, I'd say that's bullshit, because I was already a household name before this. My restaurant was one of the top ranked restaurants in the entire country. I've been on the front page of the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, Foodism, Bon Appetit has covered me, all of the local publications. Maybe on your way out, you can take a shot of all those articles that are there on the wall, all from major publications in Toronto. I had a thriving business, 60 employees. I opened up 2 new locations in 2020. I had no problem with business until I was shut down. Now, if I had a small restaurant, maybe 1,000 square feet, 1,500 square feet, that'd be very well suited for takeout. But as you can see, all my restaurants have 80 to 100 seats. This food, well, I had a strong takeout business. It represented about 40% of my sales. You take out the 60% of dine-in, you just took all the wind out of the sales. You made it that I had to reduce my staff by 60%, which means I was the one who had to go and lay off all those people. Now, because I did what I did, I had to lay off even more because I've lost a lot of support. But you know what? I think that some things are more important than money. I'm willing to lose everything that I have worked for because I know I'll be successful in whatever I go and do after this. So this is about a lot more than my restaurant. It's about a lot more than barbecue. It's about our own liberties and our freedoms, which are being absolutely trampled by the government.
And Adam, going back to liberties and freedoms being trampled, not necessarily for everyone. We can look at the big box stores, and one point that came up during your barbecue rebellion in Etobicoke, about 300, 400 meters away, there is a Costco. It was jammed to the gills every day I was there. Lo and behold, their food service operation was also open. So, is this one of the arguments you're using in a court of law, the hypocrisy that the law is very selective in terms of who has to shut down, who doesn't have to shut down, who is essential, who is non-essential?
I don't really like to get into those arguments about the hypocrisy of the different treatment, because you know where that got us a few months ago when everybody was saying, well, this is unfair, the retail stores have to shut down, but Walmart can stay open. Well, how did the province react to that? They said, well, we got to tape off all the undies and the socks at Walmart. So that got us into these situations. I don't care that Costco's open and Walmart's open. I think they should be open. I also think all the gyms, the salons, the barbershops, the restaurants, and the independent retail stores, they should all be open as well. Zero restrictions, 100% back to business. If you're sick, if you're one of these people with an average of 3.9 comorbidities who's dying of this alleged disease, COVID, as diagnosed by a fraudulent PCR test, you know what? Stay home. You order curbside pickup. You get delivered to your house. You can wear 1 mask. You can wear 2 masks. You can wear the whole box for all I care. You can get any type of injection that you want, but let everybody else make their own choice about how they run their businesses. It is not the state's responsibility to govern businesses and how they operate.
I couldn't have said it better, Adam. I mean, if you are a so-called COVID Karen and you're scared to death about getting the virus, well, no one's forcing you into Adamson Barbecue. Like you said, stay in your basement, order skip the dishes, bake your own cherry cheesecake like the premier does. But for someone who wants to come here on their own free will and buy something that you're serving, it's almost like scalping. The police don't care much about ticket scalping anymore. The way they look at it, if I'm willing to pay $1,000 for a pair of Leafs tickets and someone's selling it to me, well, who's the victim here? There is none. So why is it that out of this fear factor, government is making its policies?
I'm not privy to those conversations. All I can do is speculate. And I don't need to do that. I think a lot of people have different ideas on why this is all happening. You're free to have those, and I can't speak with certainty about any of that. But I think a lot of us know that there's some real funny business going on at the higher levels.
And you know, I should make this a point too, Adam, that I think when all is said and done, when the smoke is settled, the dust is cleared, we have to have a serious look at who is really making these decisions. And by that I mean unaccountable, non-elected public health authorities. I don't call them top doctors. Most of these people haven't practiced medicine in decades. And it seems that they're calling the shots. And sure enough, the signature on your closure notice at the Etobicoke location was Dr. Eileen DeVilla of the City of Toronto. I think these people have had an extraordinary amount of power put into their bailiwick, which they never had the right to in the first place.
Well, I don't know if those are really the people with this vast power. It might be perceived to be that way, but a lot of these people, they work for other organizations that have nothing to do with our country. They take their barking orders from maybe the World Health Organization. I know that some of our people in government, like our Finance Minister Freeland, she has roles with the World Economic Forum. There's another level beyond our federal government that a lot of these decisions are coming down from. And that's actually the first argument in our constitutional challenge is, did the federal government have the authority to just blanket lock down the country with no internal debate because a foreign entity, the World Health Organization, declared there's a pandemic? I don't think so. But there's someone who can speak to that a lot better than me, those details of the case. And I'd love maybe if you could direct some of those questions to Chris. Chris has been he's been with me right from the start of this. He's been with me through all of the lawyers being fired, and he's really helped to quarterback this case.
Okay, well, let's bring Chris into this right now.
Wonderful.
Hello, Chris.
Come on in. Thanks for all your help, Chris.
Thank you.
And Chris, it's Chris Weisdorf,
Yes.
and you are an advisor to Adam Skelly.
Advisor and coordinator of evidence.
Oh,
Advisor
okay.
and coordinator of evidence.
And I understand, by the way, the trial actually kicks off, is it June 28th?
June 28th and June 29th.
Okay, then.
Yeah.
And is this something the public can, I mean, it's going to be a Zoom trial, I take it. Is this something the public at large can tune in to watch as well?
We don't know what the limits are, both the technical limits and whatever the limits that the court sets. We do know that any type of proceeding like this can't be recorded. So that's the only concern of the courts because it's the law. So other than that, we could potentially have 100,000 people in the call. We don't know what the limits are yet. We're going to find that out. But at the very least, we should have several hundred people be able to attend because that's occurred in other hearings.
And I know you've done an incredible amount of research into this issue. What's the crux of your argument?
Well, there are numerous parts to this constitutional challenge. So the Reopening Ontario Act is being challenged. The Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act is being challenged. Originally it was the lockdown provisions, but it goes further in our written arguments that were just brought. So with respect to the constitutional part, it's sections 2, 7, 8, and 9, and also section 36. 2 is the freedom of conscience, opinion, thought, belief, and expression, peaceful assembly and association. We're really arguing that section 2B and 2C in there. And then section 7 is life, liberty, and security of the person, to not be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. So liberty is the key arguments that we're making. You have liberty to make that is key decisions about one's life. There's section 8, which is to be free from an unreasonable search and seizure. So the government has essentially suspended your rights with respect to COVID. They can search you and they can determine who you are. It's called stop and identify in the United States. So they've thrown that out, and if we didn't challenge that, that could go a lot further. There's Section 9, which is the right against arbitrary detention and imprisonment. We wanted to argue Section 15, that was an original notice. We ran out of room. There's only 45 pages to work with, which sounds like a lot, it isn't. So Section 15 is equality rights, so you brought that up. Adam in particular didn't really like those arguments, but in any case, we ran out of room, so we couldn't advance those arguments. And then there's Section 36, which is equalization, the right to equal opportunity under the law. It is something that is in the Constitution, but it's something which is not meant to really constrain government too much. But nevertheless, that was put in there. It's an important part of the Constitution, and I think overall it complements our other arguments. And in addition, we are arguing that, and this goes to the reasonable limits clause at Section 1 of the Charter. So if there's a breach of the Charter, they have to do a complex analysis of, is it pressing or substantial? Is it proportional? Is it rationally connected? Is it minimally impairing? Are the beneficial effects, do they outweigh the deleterious effects? That kind of thing. It's a complex analysis that's done. And essentially that weighs on something like the reasonable limits is, they're contingent upon there being reasonable alternatives to whatever they're doing to impair the Charter. And further to that, under the actual emergency law itself, it says if there are reasonable alternatives, they cannot invoke emergency measures. So that's why that is absolutely critical in this case, because anyone can argue what constitutes a state of emergency, but no one can argue that there weren't reasonable alternatives. The government has said there weren't, and they keep pounding the table on that. Of course, we brought the evidence, and the government didn't dispute any of it.
I think you've got some fascinating arguments there. I can hardly wait to see them play out in the court of law. The big question for me, Chris, is this. Adam has so many enemies, as we saw going back to last November. The mayor, the health bureaucracy, the bureaucrats of the city, law enforcement, the provincial government, the mainstream media. The question is, do you think you will get a fair shake in a court of law?
Well, that's a tough question to answer. I would say that irrespective of different things, unusual things that we feel have happened in this case thus far, we believe we'll get a fair shot. Irrespective of that, we know from history, more of the United States than other countries, that in times of war or times of great peril, generally the courts will not override the will of the legislature, the will of Parliament, the will of Congress in the United States, because they're unelected officials. And so what they'll generally do is they'll side with the majority, whatever the populace says. So if the majority of the population says jail Japanese people, put them in internment camps as they did in the 1940s during World War II, that was challenged in 1944, went before the Supreme Court, Korematsu v. United States. The Supreme Court upheld that. They suspended constitutional rights for years. They said it's upheld, and it wasn't a nail biter. It was 6-3. So generally, there is deference to emergency measures within the scope of a state of war or times of great peril. So while we have an extremely powerful case, we know the evidence is going to go more and more in our favor. So on appeal, the science will continue to move in our favor. That'll weigh in. But we expect this to be appealed no matter what. So even if we win this, the government's going to appeal. If we lose it, we're going to appeal. We expect this is something that will go to the Supreme Court. In the United States, the first thing to go to the Supreme Court was in May of 2020. Here, the first thing that'll go to the Supreme Court is maybe 2 years from now. Wow. So we feel that the evidence is lopsided in our favor. We have six experts. They've submitted 6 expert reports. The government came back with 1. Didn't touch any of our evidence with a proverbial 40-foot pole. Then our experts came back with the right of reply and crushed that expert with 5 more reports. So there's literally 11 reports to their 1. There's over 200 references to peer-reviewed papers with respect to our reports and only 8 from the government. So we've crushed them with the evidence. Usually goes the opposite way, where the government crushes the individual with all of their evidence. They just sort of punt it and pretend, they're trying to pretend that I've gone in I guess a fetal position and have not attempted to defend in any way, refute our evidence and say that our experts are not qualified, that our evidence is inaccurate or is unreliable or simply a misrepresentation. That has not happened at all.
Well, that is fascinating, Chris, and thank you for weighing in with your analysis. And there you have it, folks. The Great Canadian Barbecue Rebellion. It might be on the back burner right now, but it's going to move to the front burner on June 28th and June 29th when Adam finally has his day in court. We'll be there to cover that, and hopefully justice shall prevail. For Rebel News, I'm David the Menzoid Menzies.